when I'm looking around in America, I see ordinary Americans becoming very suspicious of the healthcare industry, very suspicious of vaccines. They feel like there's not much they can do other than just say no to things, say no to the junk food, say no to the vaxes. Do you think that that's the right kind of attitude? How do you stop people from becoming too paranoid?
Well, the government needs to turn over a new leaf and try being honest. Because of their vast dishonesty, people are hesitant. People don't believe the government anymore. And I'll give you an example of why they probably shouldn't believe the government. The vaccine committees that came forward to approve a booster vaccine for COVID, they really recommended only for over 65 or those who are at risk for COVID. The Biden administration, though, came forward and said, no, your 6-month-old should take it. Everybody from 6 months of age and up should take this COVID vaccine. Well, when you do the investigation, you find that the vaccine is actually of greater risk to a young person, to a child, a toddler, adolescent, teenager, young adult, than the disease. We find that no young, healthy people, even when the virus was at its worst in 2020, young, healthy people didn't die from COVID. But we do know that somewhere between about 2 and 6 out of 10,000 who take this vaccine will have an inflammation of the heart such that they present to the emergency room with chest pain and elevated heart enzymes, similar to what happens in a heart attack. So it's a serious thing that can happen to a perfectly healthy kid. And we know that COVID doesn't kill kids, doesn't kill healthy children. And by now, there are a couple things have happened too. The virus has mutated to become less dangerous, and the immunity that is collective for all of us has increased over time because most people have had vaccines, most people have had COVID, and they just haven't been honest with us. And they really need to tell us the truth. So, for example, let's say you are at risk. Let's say you're 75 years old and you're 100 pounds overweight and you've got other medical problems. Should you take the COVID vaccine? Well, what you would want to know first would be, is anybody dying from COVID who's had it previously? That's one question. If I've already had COVID once, does anybody come back, get it a second time, and die from it? I think the answer may well be zero. But let's say you've had it once and you've had a couple of vaccines. Does anybody who's already had COVID once and had a couple of vaccines come back and get COVID and die? I think the truth of the matter is they don't. The government will not divulge that information. Because they don't, it appears as if the government perhaps is more concerned with the profit of Pfizer and Moderna than they are actually with the truth. For example, with children, there never was proof, actually with children or adults, that the vaccine stopped transmission. But there also was never any evidence for children that it reduced hospitalization or death. Why? Because no children were going to the hospital or dying to begin with. How do you prove that it's efficacious if no children are going to the hospital? In fact, when Anthony Fauci was challenged on this, he said, well, they show that kids will make an antibody if you give them a vaccine. And I informed him that I could give your kid 100 vaccines. They'll make antibodies every time. It doesn't mean they need them. I can inject your kid with any kind of foreign particle, dirt, and they'll make antibodies to it, but it doesn't mean they need a vaccine to dirt. And this is the problem with these people, is they're now advocating for things that seem to enrich a company, a billion-dollar company, but don't seem to have factual evidence that it's beneficial to your child. So now people are distrusting them on everything. And actually, there probably are things that are vaccines that your kids should probably take, and it still should be your choice. I'm a big person on voluntarism and choice, but at the same time, people are suspecting everything the government tells them, but because we've had such a spate of dishonesty.
Yeah, credibility gap is so bad, but your leadership on this and just your expertise has been so crucial. Honest speech coming out of the government, obviously long overdue. But let's talk about free speech a little bit more broadly, because let's face it, before Twitter became X, free speech not online, not what it was. And just that lockdown on what could be said and what couldn't was such a big part of how that COVID scam was put over on so much of America. You're a big free speech guy, free speech defender. How close do you think we are to where we need to be on free speech, especially online? And how optimistic are you that we're going to be able to get there through whether it's Elon Musk or Donald Trump or sort of that coalition?
All I can say is thank God for Elon Musk. When Elon Musk paid $44 billion for Twitter, people said, really? $44 billion? And he said, look, I didn't spend $44 billion for Twitter. I spent it to defend freedom of speech. And absolutely, he's been integral to that, not only just for Twitter, but at exposing what the government was doing. I'm one of those libertarian conservatives who believes that you can't tell Facebook they have to post your stuff. You can't tell Twitter they have to post my opinion. But what you can do is you can prevent government from colluding with Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and taking down constitutionally protected speech. So when I found out from the Twitter files, when Matt Taibbi and Michael Shackelford and others were revealing this stuff, what I discovered was it wasn't just them doing it voluntarily, it was the government coercing them. So I wrote a bill which had been in the works for quite a while. And this is a bill that says and regulates government. It says government cannot sit down with any media. They can't sit down with Blaze TV. They can't sit down with CNN, Fox, but they can't sit down with social media either and coerce or cajole or pressure them into taking down constitutionally protected speech. The reason we describe it as constitutionally protected speech is the other side will say, what about child pornography or, sex trade and all these things? And our response is those are illegal. The government's allowed to talk to people about taking down things that are advertising things that are illegal. And so by describing it as constitutional speech, we think we have a bill that actually passes constitutional muster, but we haven't been able to get any Democrats on board. The Democrats who were once defenders of freedom of speech are lost. They don't seem to be present in the debate at all.
Well, there's a point where the rubber meets the road, I think, on the online stuff, where there are some folks on the right in the GOP who are saying, look, we need to be more aggressive about protecting kids online. It's not just about free speech. You got to take some other stuff into consideration. And I know this is a bit of a fight that's brewing on the Hill as well. What would your message be on taking that more libertarian standpoint?
I think we have to be very, very careful that what we are doing is regulating the government, not private business. The First Amendment says Congress shall pass no law. It's all about what government can do and not the private business. So we have to be very careful about saying, oh, we'll set up a commission to decide, whether or not they're being fair to the right or fair to the left. I'm not for that because my fear is in setting up any kind of government agency that would be determining what speech is. So I'm all into regulating what government can do, but I want to stay away from regulating content of individual broadcasters.